evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, February 14th. U.S. President Donald Trump repeated his vision on Thursday of erasing the massive border between Canada and the United States. Mr. Trump continued to expand on ideas around American imperialism and his desire to make Canada the 51st state.
Canada's been very bad to us on trade, but now Canada's going to have to start paying up. And Canada's been tough on the military because they have a very low military cost. They think we're going to, protect them with our military, which is unfair. So Canada is going to be a very interesting situation because, we just don't need their product. And yet they survive off the fact that we do 95% of what they do. And Canada is just absolutely, I say it, and sometimes people smile and sometimes they say, great idea, but Canada, their taxes would come down greatly. Their security would go up greatly. Amazing things happen to Canada. And really Canada in this particular, why would we pay $200 billion a year in subsidies to Canada when they're not a state? You do that for a state, but you don't do that for somebody else's country. So I think Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
Going with Canada, there was obviously a delay in implementing those tariffs.
I spoke to Governor Trudeau on numerous occasions, and we'll see what happens. But it just sets up so good for them. Look, the people would pay much less tax than they're paying right now. They'd have perfect military protection. They don't have any military protection because and you take a look at what's going on out there. You have Russian ships, you have China ships, you have Chinese ships, you have a lot of ships out there. And, people are in danger. This is a different world today. It's a different world. They need our protection.
Speaking in the Oval Office, the president repeated his claim that Canada is being subsidized by Americans. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Canada would never be the 51st state, even though behind closed doors, the Prime Minister said the annexation calls appear to be a real thing. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration is taking aim at Canada's digital services tax as a major trade irritant. The White House sent out a document calling digital taxes in both Canada and France unfair for taxing American companies. The 3% tax requires large tech businesses to pay tax on revenues earned by users in Canada. Now to our news director, David Clement, for more on the tax and the disagreement between the U.S. and Canada.
Thank you for that, Teresa. On the digital services tax, it's first important to really get an understanding of what the tax is and who it applies to. So the tax received royal assent in June of 2024, coming into effect at the end of June in 2024. The government has said the primary goal is to ensure that revenue from digital services provided to users in Canada is taxed, focusing on large businesses, both domestic and foreign, that provide services in the online marketplaces, digital advertising space, social media, and user data monetization. So how the tax works is it's a 3% tax on Canadian digital services revenue exceeding $20 million annually. And so it's specifically targeted towards online marketplace services revenue, digital advertising services revenue, social media services revenue, and user data revenue. It only applies for companies who have a global revenue of somewhere near $1 billion Canadian, while also exceeding $20 million Canadian in revenue in Canadian operations per year. So it is specifically on large companies operating in the tech space. For more specifics in terms of who actually would qualify under this tax, so if we divide it up by the different types of qualifying companies, so Alphabet, which most people would otherwise know as Google, their services like Google Ads, Google Play, YouTube, the ads and data there qualify Alphabet or Google in this tax. Meta for Facebook and Instagram, Amazon So Amazon's marketplace, Amazon's web services, as well as advertising on Amazon. Apple would be revenue from their apps, their app sales and in-app purchases and targeted ads within Apple services. Microsoft would also qualify through Bing, LinkedIn, their Microsoft Store, their cloud computing contracts and services, but it also includes other companies. So Netflix for streaming, Uber for both transport and food delivery, Airbnb, which technically operates as an online marketplace, Spotify, and then even Snapchat, given their advertising space in Canada. And so it's important to note here that there's nothing uniquely anti-American or American-focused in the legislation. However, given the nature of these markets, they're dominated by U.S. companies. And so the Trump administration views this essentially as a targeted tax against U.S. companies, while it isn't specific to just American companies. Of the companies I just listed off, only one of them, being Spotify, is not an American company. So it has an overwhelming impact on U.S. tech companies. And so we can fully expect that the debate over this is going to pick up as the trade war looms between Canada and the United States, and as the Trump administration's grievances about trading practices with Canada shift. Because you remember, it's been about fentanyl, it's been about the border, it's been about immigration. There have been references to dairy and supply management, which we chatted about before. This is another thorn from the Trump administration's perspective in terms of the ability for American businesses to operate internationally. And so we'll really see where this goes.
While speaking to the press about defense spending and the potential for saving from cutting waste, Donald Trump explained that he's looking to sit down with leaders of both China and Russia to work out a deal to reduce nuclear weapons.
Elon Musk identifies wasteful spending in the Defense Department, defense contractors, and the like. Are you willing to go after that spending as well?
We have to go waste, fraud, and abuse. Yeah, and we're doing that.
Could we, I'm just wondering about your conversations on defense spending. Would you want to do that as a trilateral, or would you use the existing body that also already includes China and Russia, the G20?
No, it's the people. It's President Putin, President Xi. I don't need bodies. I don't need anything. It's people. It's all about people. It's about relationship and people. And, I've had a good relationship with President Putin. I've had a good relationship with President Xi. It's about people. And I think when things straighten out, which I hope will be in the not too distant future, the meeting I want to have first is a meeting with China and a meeting with Russia on slowing down, stopping, and reducing nuclear weapons in particular, and also on not having to spend the kind of money we're all spending on weapons, military weapons generally.
I think my question is, would you have those meetings separately with each of those leaders, or would you try to bring them all together?
Both. You start off separately, and that's what was happening. I was dealing with President Putin. We had really an understanding where we were going to denuclearize. What a beautiful term that is, right? Denuclearize. What a great thing if we could do that. And we were going to, he really liked the idea, and so did I. And we had then called China, and China was very open to it. And then COVID hit, and then we had a rigged election. But now there was no rigged election. Now we have an election that was too big to rig. That's what my whole theme was, too big to rig. And they tried, but they didn't pull it off.
Ukraine's president says a Russian drone strike has hit the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, slamming into the structure's protective confinement shell. Vladimir Zelensky says the high explosive warhead did some damage, but radiation levels did not increase, and a fire that was ignited has since been put out. The containment shell is a protective cover built around the fourth reactor of the plant, which exploded in 1986, causing one of the worst accidents in nuclear history. A Kremlin spokesman denied Ukrainian claims that Russia's strike on the nuclear power plant. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has congratulated Syria's interim president, despite him leading a group Canada still designates a terrorist organization. The group is often called HTS, and it toppled the regime of Bashar al-Assad last December, ending a brutal dictatorship. The interim Syrian president has hinted at aiming for a multicultural society. The Prime Minister's office has been asked whether Canada plans to remove HTS from its terror listings. All right, don't go anywhere. Coming up after the break, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance leads the U.S. delegation of today's security conference. And NATO Secretary General emphasizes that European countries need to be doing more to beef up security. And Vice President J.D. Vance says Europe freedom is in danger. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. Vice President J.D. Vance led the U.S. delegation to the Munich Security Conference today amid concern and uncertainty over U.S. foreign policy. The future of Ukraine was a top item on the agenda following a phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin this week. But Vice President Vance also had some strong words for Germany and their industrial policy.
You win wars with weapons, and the West doesn't make enough weapons. Now, I don't mean to beat up on Germany here because I love Germany, but I wanted to respond to something Ms. Lang said earlier. Look, Germany is the one country, maybe, in NATO that did not follow the stupid Washington consensus and allow their country to be deindustrialized during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And yet at the very moment that Putin is more and more powerful, where the Russian army is invading European countries en masse, this is the point at which Germany starts to deindustrialize. Look at the number of people working in manufacturing in Germany now versus 10 years ago. Look at the critical raw materials produced in Germany now versus 10 years ago. The energy dependence now versus 10 or 20 years ago. We have got to stop deindustrializing. We want Europe to be successful, but Europe has got to take a bigger role in its own security. You can't do that.
The vice president also used his speech to blast European countries for limiting free speech, saying that freedom is in danger.
And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution.
And it wasn't just the vice president calling out Europe. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte also emphasized that European countries within NATO need to be doing more.
Inside of NATO and, of course, in Canada. And the third is spending. We have to spend more. The European part of NATO has to spend more. We do not spend enough. We have to bring it up to, as I said before, probably north of 3%. I cannot commit to a number now, but we will do it based on facts and figures, based on the capability targeting process. But it is absolutely clear, if we stick with the current numbers, we will not get there. We will not be safe in 4 or 5 years. So we not only have to do this because it is fair towards the Americans, who want us to do more, to take a bigger share of the burden, but also because we have to make sure that we can protect ourselves collectively. So thank you.
Well, in that same press conference, the Secretary General was pushed on the growing debate on Ukraine's membership in NATO.
Only 8 months ago, you had a summit in Washington, D.C. All 32 allies agreed, and I know you know these words, but I'll read them to you. We will continue to support Ukraine on its irreversible path to full Euro-Atlantic integration, including NATO membership. Does NATO still stand by those words?
Where in those lines it says that it should be part of a peace deal now? Where did you see that?
I'm asking you whether you stand, when NATO stands by that word.
That's the conclusion by 32 leaders. But what we are talking about here is the debate, what is the best possible way to make sure that a peace deal is lasting, that a peace deal is enduring. And there are many ways to do that. But it has never been said before, and not even in that Washington summit statement, that when a peace deal would be done on Ukraine, that in that peace deal it should be NATO full stop. That's not the case.
Do you agree that with that commitment that one day there will be full...
I was not in that summit. It was a summit by the 32 leaders. And clearly that is an outcome of that summit. But again, this is not about the peace deal. And I know that many think that part of a peace deal should be NATO. But it has never been promised to Ukraine that it will be part of the outcome. And I think we should take this step by step. Get them in a position of strength, making sure that whenever a deal is done, that deal will be such that Putin will not try again. Can I be very honest about my European friends? I really believe what Europeans have to do now is to come up with the concrete plans. One, to get more military aid into Ukraine. Secondly, to get more training into Ukraine. I know that many initiatives are being thought through, are really already brought on board. But also to think through that whenever a peace deal is done, how European countries, probably together with others, but how the European countries can help there. So create the facts on the ground, create the facts in terms of the plans you are making, and that is the best way to get your part at a table. So I would say do this, that's positive, much better than to think, okay, where are we?
In response to some of the criticism directed at the EU and its member states, the president of the European Commission acknowledged that Europe has to do more when it comes to security.
Many in the security circles in Europe were confused, some even worried, by the comments made by a senior US official earlier this week. But we need to be honest here. And we need to avoid outrage and outcry. Because if we listen to the substance of the remarks, we not only understand where they are coming from, but recognize there are some remarks we can agree on. Because yes, both the United States and the European Union want an end to the bloodshed. We want a just and lasting peace. One that leads to a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. And Ukraine should be given solid security guarantees. But perhaps what resonates with me the most is the need for Europe not only to speak frankly, but also to act accordingly. So let there be no room for any doubt. I believe when it comes to European security, Europe has to do more. Europe must bring more to the table. And to achieve this, we need a surge in European defense spending.
The federal government has given border guards the power to revoke some temporary resident visas and electronic travel documents. Border and immigration officers are now able to revoke documents if a holder is deemed inadmissible to Canada or if the document is lost, stolen, destroyed, or abandoned. Officers can also cancel documents if a holder becomes a permanent resident, dies, or finds they were issued in error. A spokesperson for Immigration Minister Mark Miller says that the changes will help remove temporary visas that have become redundant. With the federal government's temporary tax break ending tomorrow, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has stated that the NDP government would permanently remove the GST off of essentials.
What a new Democrat government would do, what we would do together, we would give you a break. I'm proposing that a new Democrat government would permanently remove the GST off of essentials. Essentials like your home heating bill, like your cellular and internet bills, giving you a break on the things that you need, like your grocery, grab-and-go groceries, diapers, children's clothing. Working folks, everyday people need a break, not millionaires. With New Democrats, we're going to give you a break. With Mark Carney and the Liberals, they want to give millionaires a break. I think that's wrong.
The tax break came into effect around the holidays and has applied to restaurant meals, children's clothing and toys, wine and beer, and other items. Canadian business owners say it's been a gift, but not one that inspired the flurry of sales some had anticipated. During the announcement, Mr. Singh also said it's unfair to make Canadians pay more amid the threat of tariffs from President Donald Trump. All right, stay tuned. Up next, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre addresses caucus as poll numbers slump and U.S. tariff threats loom. Don't go anywhere. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre spoke to his caucus in Ottawa this morning. When asked about the polls, MP Michael Barrett questioned why the media isn't asking Mark Carney about his business dealings.
Mr. Barrett, any concern about the polls at all? Where the party's standing right now?
We've been consistently concerned about Carbon Tax Carney's failure to provide any transparency to Canadians about his financial interests for half a decade while he's been advising the Carney-Trudeau Liberal government. And there have been if only few questions from the media about how much his megacorp profited while he was advising the government. And this is incredibly important to Canadians after we've had 9 years of a government run by serial ethical lawbreakers from the Prime Minister through his front bench, including ministers who are reoffering and supporting Carbon Tax Carney in his bid to run the Liberal Party and to be Prime Minister of Canada. It's unbelievable that this guy has provided no transparency whatsoever about what his financial interests are. So Canadians are wondering this. We've been demanding answers, but there hasn't been a lot of ink spilled on it, and certainly Mark Carney's been in witness protection and hasn't answered a whole lot of questions. So we're going to keep asking those questions. We look forward to seeing and reading the questions that you've put to Carbon Tax Carney about his profits that he's cashed in while advising the NDP Liberal government.
Do you think this election is going to be about the carbon tax? Do you think this election is going to be about the carbon tax? Do you think it's going to be more about Donald Trump and Canada-U.S. relations?
Look, we are the only party who said that we're going to get rid of the carbon tax. We've heard lies from the Liberals about what they're going to do with the carbon tax, and Carbon Tax Carney committing to bring in a shadow carbon tax on Canadians. A tax by any tax is still taking money out of a tax by any name is still taking money out of Canadians' pockets. And so this election is about what's best for Canadians, putting Canadians first, and nothing puts Canadians first like axing the carbon tax. Thanks very much.
MP Andrew Scheer accused Mr. Carney of downplaying the drug crisis in Canada in response to a speech he previously made where he called it an absolute crisis in the U.S., but just a challenge in Canada.
Was downplaying the opioid crisis that is facing Canada, that Canadians are suffering from. Nearly 50,000 Canadians have lost their lives. Fathers and mothers have lost children, people have lost siblings, as a direct result of the 9 years of Carney-Trudeau soft on drugs, soft on crime approach, a direct result of the Carney-Trudeau Liberals giving out free opioids, legalizing drug use in public spaces. And to downplay that, to refuse to call it a crisis and just call it a challenge, shows you that he doesn't have to deal with these types of consequences of these policies. He lives in a completely different world. He doesn't have to buy groceries in tough neighborhoods or take public transit. And he made those comments 2 days ago, and yesterday he was in Vancouver, didn't get a single question from the media on this. So why isn't the media holding Mark Carney to account? He's about to become the Prime Minister because a small group of Liberal Party members are going to install him. The least you can do is cover the way he's treating these important issues that are facing Canadians.
With the federal Liberal leadership race heating up, former Bank of Canada Chief Mark Carney says he plans to promote prefabricated and modular homes to help tackle the housing affordability crisis.
I wanted to come here because I think, as we all know, we have a housing crisis in Canada, and we need to address it. And in order to address the housing crisis, we need to build a lot of homes, just under 4 million homes over the course of the next decade. And there's a series of programs that are being put in place by the federal government, support by provinces and municipalities that are going to help that. But in order really to achieve those objectives, like many of the changes we're going to need to do in Canada, we need innovation. We need to build in a different way. And this is an example of modular housing. It builds on research that's been done here in Vancouver at University of British Columbia. And just to put this in context, we can speed up, increase speeds by 20 to 50%, reduce waste by almost 50% in the construction process, reduce emissions over the course of the production process and the lifetime of the building by 20%, and really get housing for people more rapidly, more efficiently, more cheaply, again, cost reductions of over 25%, and build true Canadian technology that not just serves Canadians here, but ultimately serves around the world.
The idea is to reduce the cost, building time, and amount of construction waste for new homes. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew says his province has an in with the Trump administration.
So Manitoba's relationship with the United States of America is in a better place, I feel like, after the time we've spent here. We certainly are going to have to continue to manage this relationship. One of the important things that we heard while we were down here is that you're going to have to come back, some of our American hosts told us. And I think it shows that that friendship that we have across the 49th parallel is so important. We know that we're always going to stand up for our jobs and for Canadian values and for the province of Manitoba. And this relationship is one that we're going to have to keep nurturing. And we're just going to have to ride the wave. There's been, I think, a really good response to the efforts that we've shown on the border and on fentanyl. And of course, when it comes to the trade side, we made the case strongly that we shouldn't have tariffs when it comes to the relationship with Canada. So all in all, a very productive week, a very busy week, but an important week that we spent here.
After meeting with U.S. Secretary of the Interior Doug Burgum, Mr. Kinew said it's important to have someone in the Trump administration who knows where Manitoba is on a map.
You know, the relationship with Secretary Burgum is an important one to me, and I'm trying to build that relationship. So in terms of the conversation we have, I think I'll just describe it at a high level. And so we talked a lot about energy and critical minerals and some of his priorities. And of course, we touched on the tariffs and the border, and really just building a strong relationship. You know, for me, it's important that we have somebody in the Trump administration who knows where Manitoba is on a map. And the fact that we have that good friendship across the border, and we now have that ability to strengthen that with somebody who's in the cabinet of the Trump administration, I think is an important sign. And so that meeting and connection with Secretary Burgum is very important to me and important to the province. And as we continue to build that relationship, I think it'll be a good friendship for our two countries.
Ontario's NDP is asking the Integrity Commissioner to investigate PC leader Doug Ford's video of his trip to Washington.
Well, look, as soon as we noticed that and called him out, a little while later, They took it down. If that isn't a sure sign of guilt, I don't know what is. Look, the Integrity Commissioner has been very clear about this. They were not to use that event for partisan purposes. He turned around and did it right away. We will be asking Elections Ontario and the Integrity Commissioner to look into this, absolutely. But it has never been more clear that Doug Ford will do anything and everything it takes to hold on to power for power's sake. He has only called this election to save his own job. And I think Ontarians see through that.
The premiers were in D.C. as part of a full-court press against U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threats. But Mr. Ford's social media accounts posted a video showing clips of him in Washington that ended with the Progressive Conservative Party logo. British Columbia is canceling a promised $1,000 grocery rebate and will freeze hiring to find dollars in its budget as it prepares for 4 years of unpredictability from the U.S. The NDP had promised the rebate during the election campaign. Finance Minister Brenda Bailey calls U.S. tariffs reckless and destabilizing. Yesterday, Alberta's Minister of Environment and Protected Areas made a funding announcement on Alberta's efforts to reduce emissions.
We're announcing $55 million in funding from the industry-funded TIER program to help drive a new wave of innovation. Of course, creating jobs and providing the world and our country with the energy that it needs. It will also help attract new investments and help secure Alberta's place as a global provider of choice for responsible energy production for years to come. Of course, this is delivered through Emissions Reduction Alberta, and this funding is going to 15 projects. These include funding for technologies that use clay to help create low-carbon cement, and funding for a new sealant that will reduce costs and methane emissions for oil and gas wells. It includes funding to develop a new approach for creating concentrated milk products, letting them be transported using less energy and turned into even more products. This funding will also help upgrade Calgary's Fish Creek wastewater treatment plant to run on thermal energy, just the second time in Canada that this technology is being used. Other projects will revolutionize tree planting, keep plastics out of landfills, and increase testing using drones to improve wildfire monitoring in remote areas, something that is also top of mind for Albertans. All of these breakthroughs are being led by Albertans and tested right here at home. We are funding the trailblazers, the innovators, and the big thinkers, the people who made this such an amazing place of opportunity and promise.
All right, stay tuned. Up next, we'll have our weekly energy update with Canadians for Affordable Energy. After that, Valentine's Day might be more pricey than expected. Don't go anywhere. Forum Daily will be right back after this. Now it's time for our energy update with Dan McTeague, president at Canadians for Affordable Energy. All yours, Dan.
Well, hello again, Teresa. And we're having this very long Family Day weekend, long weekend, much deserved in many parts of the country, quite cold. And, where I am here in Ontario, of course, we see that we've had a lot of snow. So I guess climate is back, to use a word. But it also means that prices aren't going to be that crazy at the pumps this week. We are coming up to the mid-time here in the month of February. I know it's cold for everybody. Natural gas prices are up. Prices for everything are up, including carbon taxes, which are going to increase on April 1st because Canadians really love them, even though people like Mark Carney say it's just because we don't understand them. Otherwise, it's success. And by the way, I think a lot of people now are looking at their bills, natural gas and propane and others, and saying, the carbon tax rebate is not $700 more than what I'm putting into it. It's the other way around. But now I digress. Canadians are now faced with pretty substantially high gas prices. This time last year, prices were about, let's say about 10 cents a liter less. And the reason they're more expensive this year is, yes, the carbon tax went up 4 cents a liter, but the Canadian dollar. Last year at this time, $1 Canadian dollar would buy, or at least 134 pennies would buy a $1 US. This year it's 142, 143. So that has increased the price of every commodity, most notably gasoline, diesel, heating oil, and pretty much every other commodity you can imagine, because these things are priced in US terms, or the world benchmark, if you will, for a lot of commodities. So what we're looking for this week is prices to remain at the levels that they are right now. And, we've seen a bit of an increase, a spike in places like Vancouver, went up to $197.9, now down to about $191. Look for prices to remain about the $1.90 there, as I don't see much in the way of anything that's going to move prices up or down more significantly than, say, range bound 2 or 3 cents a liter. So Best case scenario, 187. Worst case scenario, 190, 191, exactly what you're paying now. Same for Vancouver, Victoria, which of course has prices that are about 6 cents a liter less just on the taxes alone. Rest of the interior BC in the 165, 170 range, 175 in some locations, depending how far north you go. Alberta will remain, 140, 142 in Calgary, and 133 to 135 in Edmonton. Of course, it's less expensive in Edmonton because refineries are right in your backyard. And we know that in Saskatchewan, prices rarely change, so remaining in the $1.50, while neighboring Manitoba, which once enjoyed the lowest prices in the country because they had no provincial sales tax, will still remain, resolutely in the $1.50, $1.54 range, pretty much where Saskatchewan is. Now, they rely on the what's called the central U.S. Midwest gas prices. When we shift over to Ontario, Northwest Ontario still relies on the same matrix, on the same pricing from that market, from the Midwest market out of Chicago, the spot market. So the prices in Thunder Bay tend to be a little different all the way over to the Manitoba border. And it's for that reason that they will probably not see much in the way of change. However, the rest of Ontario, I think, is looking at about a 2-cent increase. After Sunday, we could start to see prices drop, back to the $1.57 range, although we get a small bump on February the 15th on the Saturday, back to 157. That's true of Ottawa, London, Toronto, and Sarnia, of course, Kitchener. What we do note, and a lot of people are saying, well, Dan, your price prediction isn't exactly great. Well, that's because gas stations have decided it's a great thing to try to compete by getting rid of the retail margins. You see, gas stations control about 9 cents a liter. They often suppress that by 5 or 6 cents a liter and make the money up on beef jerky and coffee and donuts and whatever you buy in their store. That's how they make up the difference, when otherwise they'd be losing money. If they lose money, their rich uncle that spotted them the money, or their bank, will be knocking on the door saying, listen, you're not able to make ends meet. So that's really the difference. When I give a gas price prediction, I assume the gas station has to make 8 or 9 cents a liter to pay for credit card honoring, to pay for either loyalty rewards programs, pay their staff, pay themselves, pay their municipal taxes, and yes, the electricity, turn on the pump. So all these things need to be taken into consideration. People say, well, your predictions aren't accurate. No, they're accurate. They're absolutely accurate. But I can't predict what's in the mind of a gas station owner when in the afternoon they drop at 3 or 4 cents a liter. I'm not good at mind reading. I call it gas bar shenanigans, and it's always something where you have to be sort of in that plus minus situation. Now, let's go to Quebec. Quebec's always 10 cents a liter more than Ontario because of the amount of tax which they pay, especially in Montreal. So if it's $1.57, $1.56 in Toronto, it's going to be $1.67, $1.66 in Montreal. Again, we have some stations that go a lot lower than that. Quebec City is an example. Quebec City doesn't have a 2.2 cent a liter transit tax for their subway, for their metro. So that makes it a little bit cheaper in Quebec City. As for the Maritimes, well, it's a regulated price, and they use different methodologies and different formulas. In Nova Scotia, PEI, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland, they actually think they can create a synthetic market and give people the impression that they're protecting them. I won't hit too hard on them, but I find it a little strange that people will actually put their more faith in the minds of bureaucrats as to how gas prices and international commodity prices take place than relying on the markets. Now, that, of course, occurred at a time and a place when there was no gas price prediction. So 30 years ago, you didn't have Dan McTeague inventing gas price predictions and pioneering and championing it. So they have their own methodologies. Usually my view is the markets prevail, and they have to prevail, but because they make it over 5 days or 7 days and they have different formula, they can sometimes wind up with a very different price. And I'm explaining that, Teresa, because a lot of people from the Atlantic province say, well, you weren't exactly 100% on. Again, I can't guess what's in the minds of bureaucrats, and there's just far too many formulas that they use, which actually amount to nonsense. And there's a reason why the rest of North America has said no to this, except those on the far left who believe that it's good to socialize the price of everything. It also means that the price of everything doesn't necessarily reflect the value you're getting, especially when prices drop and you still have higher prices in Atlantic Canada. It's also the area that's subject not only to 1, but 2 carbon taxes, where it's costing you in carbon taxes alone roughly about 30 cents a liter. So all in all, prices across the country are going to remain, rather stable this week. Nothing crazy, but in 6 weeks from now, we have a couple things happening, Teresa. The carbon tax, 4 cents a liter right across the country, except Quebec has its own system. And of course, right after that, the switchover from winter to summer gasoline. That's a thing that should put prices up average in the another 10 cents a liter, more or less. So that's it for this week. Let's talk next week as we get closer to that date and see how close we get to what implications we will have if the tariffs are reimposed on Canada.
Now let's check out what's going on in the water. A humpback whale briefly swallowed a kayaker off Chilean Patagonia before quickly releasing him unharmed. The incident, caught on camera, quickly went viral as one of the most remarkable footage in Chile in recent years.
¡Hey! ¡Ya, vente, vente! Tranquilo, agarra el bote, agárralo, tranquilo, agárralo. Agárralo, agárralo, no te subas, agárralo. Tranquilo, agárralo. Agárralo, agárralo, vete para la orilla. Tranquilo, tranquilo. Ya voy. Agárrate de la cuerdita. Agárrate de mi cuerdita. Tranquilo, agárrate de mi cuerdita. Agárrate de mi cuerdita de atrás, no me tumbes, no me tumbes. Eso, tranquilo, tranquilo. Tranquilo, tranquilo. Vamos, vamos.
The man was kayaking on Saturday with his father, and just meters away, his father captured the moment on video, which has captured the attentions of millions around the world. 3 Canadian hosts of Saturday Night Live are reflecting on their guest appearances ahead of the show's 50th anniversary. Jason Priestley says he was surprised by the pressure cooker pace of the week leading up to his 1992 appearance. Pamela Anderson calls her 1997 hosting gig one of the best things she's ever done and the most fun she's ever had. Tom Green says he was trying to host the craziest SNL episode ever, with an appearance in 2000 that included him sharing a bath with the producer. SNL will air its live 50th anniversary special this Sunday on Global and NBC. Giving chocolates to a loved one on Valentine's Day may not only show how deep your love is, but also how deep your pockets are. The price of cocoa beans has hit unprecedented records on the commodities market, jumping to around $10,000 per metric ton in early 2025. It stood at less than $2,000 per ton in the summer of 2022, before peaking to well over $12,000 a ton last Christmas. A policy advisor for the Oxfam Fair Trade Group says annual rain and drought patterns in Western Africa weaken trees in key production areas, affecting world prices. This Valentine's Day, Cupid's arrow may cost a little more. Inflation has affected almost every aspect of life over the past few years, including the cost of finding love. The Bank of Montreal's Gail Ramsey says that many Canadians are making adjustments in their dating world and limiting their spending. A BMO survey shows more than half of single Canadians say they're going on fewer dates or looking for less expensive dating activities. Once the numbers were crunched, Canadians on average spent $173 per date, including food, drinks, and tickets. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to follow us on social media. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us on Forum Daily News. Happy Valentine's Day and good night, Canada.